Amanda, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So, I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So I actually wanted to be the first female president of the United States. That was my big goal.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yes. And I'm a little sad now in hindsight that I still could be theoretically, right? We haven't had
Of
one
course.
yet, but but I would have liked to think we had one before now. But yes, I had it all planned out how long I was going to be in the Senate and then I was going to run for president. It was a whole thing.
You're the first person on the podcast to have that answer, so I love it. And tell me, how do you think that connects to what you do today?
Yeah, I think I've always had a passion for women empowerment and women's equality. Back then, when that was my ambition, I also remember writing a report on Susan B. Anthony and everything that she had done. So I think that really ties in to what I do now in helping women get out of their comfort zone, do the things they think they can't do. I think so many women, especially middle-aged women around my age, tend to feel like they get stuck. They hold themselves back to only doing what they've already done, which if you think about that, right, if Susan B. Anthony, for example, had just said, oh, well, women have never gotten to vote before, so why would I even try to get women to vote now? We wouldn't have had 100 years of being able to vote in this country. So I think it's so important for all of us as individuals to realize what we can do. So it definitely ties into what my passion was back when I was in fifth grade.
Well, and then what's coming through for me too is how much you seem to love history too.
Yeah, I love to
Mm.
read. I love watching documentaries. I mean, I'm true crime obsessed too, so it's not all like altruistic history like women's right to vote. But I like to understand why things are the way that they are. Before I was a coach, I was an attorney, still technically am an attorney. So I think that plays into it too, liking to do the research and understanding all of the background of everything.
Can you walk us through from that point in as a kid when you wanted to be the first female president to the work you do today? Did you want to be an attorney back then? Like, walk us through that journey.
Lots of twists and turns. So
Mm.
I actually grew up in a family of lawyers. My dad is
Ah.
an attorney. His dad is an attorney. I have an uncle who's an attorney, and then that's on my dad's side, and then on my mom's side, her grandfather was an attorney. So there's a lot of history in that for me as well. And my dad and grandfather and uncle were all in a firm together. They have their own firm. So it was a big part of kind of our family culture growing up. You know, we had all these lawyers in the family. So no, I rebelled against that. I was like, no, I don't want to be a lawyer.
So was there pressure coming from them for you to follow that path?
No, I don't think there was a lot of pressure.
Okay.
I mean, it was talked about, and I'm from a really small town. So, I mean, it was kind of always topic of conversation, but it wasn't like, oh, I had to go to law school or anything like that.
Gotcha.
No, I actually majored in marketing in undergrad. So yeah, I have a business degree and had I don't know how, I like to say it was an epiphany, but it could have been a panic attack in the middle of the night. And when I was in college, and I'm old, so it was dial-up internet, and
You are not old.
I got out of bed and dialed up my internet and registered for, which I kind of can't believe I could do that online back then, but registered for the LSAT, the law school entrance exam in the middle of the night and didn't tell anybody. So yeah, my sister knew just because I stayed with her, like this test was at her college. And so I stayed with her the night before the test, so she knew. So I did that, applied to law school, again, didn't tell anybody except for the professors that wrote my recommendation letters. And I only applied to one law school. My dad and my grandpa and my great grandfather had all gone to the same law school. So I applied there, which I didn't really realize at the time was kind of I don't want to say ambitious because I got in, but it wasn't like a school like, oh, everybody that applies gets in kind of thing. So I just was like, okay, well, if I get in, then I'll think about going to law school. If I don't get in, then I'll just keep applying for marketing jobs, right? So I got in, ended up going to law school. So yeah, so I did that, finished law school. I met my first husband in law school. We got married. I worked for a couple of years, and then I was a stay-at-home mom for 5 years. And then when my first husband and I got divorced, I went back to work and got a job in-house for a company, and then which led me to the longest period of my legal career where I was at a firm that was a national law firm, very like boutique niche market kind of thing. So I had clients all over the country, traveled all of the time, kept getting promoted. I worked my way up. I was basically at the top of what I imagined my career was going to be. Like I was doing
Mm.
everything that I wanted to be doing. And I was so miserable, so worn down. I was traveling all the time. I was getting sick. Like my body was literally breaking down. On the day that I left my firm, I was hooked up to a cardiac Holter monitor because I had been in the ER twice with chest pains in my 30s. So I was like, oh my gosh, what? Like, what am I going to do with my life? I can't sustain this. And there was
Mm.
a lot of factors to it, the workload, the culture of the firm that I was at. But I just thought, this is not what I want to be doing. And I don't feel like I'm doing something that has a purpose anymore. I had felt that way when I started
Mm.
that part of my career, but it didn't feel that way anymore. And I felt like I wasn't working for the things that I wanted to be working for.
Mm.
So I actually left without a plan, which I do not recommend to your listeners. I was fortunate that I had some savings and I could take some time to figure out what I wanted to do next, but I really did not know what was
Mm.
next for me. So I did a lot of work, a lot of soul searching, a lot of time thinking, how do I want to use what I consider to be my strengths and my passion to help others to live in a way that I feel fulfilled and purposeful. And it doesn't just feel like I'm contributing to somebody else's life's work, which is kind of where I felt like what I was doing, it didn't resonate with me anymore. So anyway,
Mm.
so after all of that, that led me to coaching. So I got certified as a life coach
Mhm.
and just really have felt really called and grateful that I get to work with women and show other women that they don't have to live by previous decisions that they made. Because I think that's really where I felt very stuck. It's like, well, I made all of these decisions to be successful in this career, in this field, and now I don't want to do it anymore. And I just kept telling myself that it was too late or I couldn't do anything else or what would that even look like? And so I was taking it all in internally instead of exploring what else I could do.
There's so many points I want to hit on from your story there. I love what you just said about how sometimes people can feel like it's too late. And I see this in client conversation all the time too, where it's this feeling of, well, wasn't that then if I'm wanting to make a pivot, a complete waste of time? I can't just throw that all away. Can you talk about that transition? Because I tell clients sometimes our ego is tied to our titles, and that's normal. It happens. How did you deal with that? Because I imagine that must have been a difficult, challenging transition to leave something that your grandpa, your dad from a small town, you're respected probably for it. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And it's a process like everything else. So
Yeah,
some days are better than others in
you're
terms of
right.
coming to terms with that. But I do agree with you. I see that in people too, like lawyers, doctors, teachers, where society has put a certain amount of weight on that profession. I think some of those professions, more so than others, become part of your identity more
Yes.
so than just as
Yes.
your job. And so that can feel like you're really leaving behind a piece of yourself instead of just
Mm.
transitioning jobs. So I think that's some of where that hang up comes from.
And how
But
was that for you, that leaving that identity?
yeah, it was rough at first. And I heard somebody else say this, so this is not my words, but it really made an impact for me. So I will share it. And it was a person who was a doctor who then transitioned to become a coach. And she
Mm.
said what she had to do was shift her idea of herself from a doctor who happens to also coach, from a coach who happened to go to medical school. And I thought, light bulb moment. That
Mm.
really shifted for me. Like I felt it when I heard her say that, that I was like, oh, right, that's what I am. I'm a coach who happened to go to law school. I'm a coach who happens to be an attorney as well. And I think that really helped shift. To your point, it helped me with that wasn't a waste. My career wasn't a waste. I don't regret it. I truthfully have never had that thought like, oh, I wish I would have found this 15 years
Mm.
ago. I'm grateful
Mm.
for the experiences that I had. And I do think some of that is society telling us if you don't stick with something, it was a waste. But
Mm.
I just don't think that's true. I think you learn so much from every experience that you had, whether you take it with you forever or not. I like to go back to like children and babies when I think of things like this. If you have a child, like both of my daughters and me did dance when we were young, took dance class, were in dance recitals, had all of the frilly costumes. None of us are professional dancers. None of us are going to
Mm.
be professional
Mm.
dancers. But that was
Mm.
so much fun. That was such a great experience. We made friends. We learned things, from
Mm.
standing in line to taking our turn to pointing our toes. There's so many things that you learn from those experiences. I don't think anybody would say to a 7-year-old girl, why are you taking ballet? It's not like you're going to be on stage in New York, right? It's the experience of it. And I think at some point in our lives, especially as women, we decide that we no longer get to do something just for the experience of it. It has to be for a purpose, and we have to intend to do it forever.
Oh, that was really powerful. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people, because I think when we think about children, we think about our kids, we tend to be a lot kinder than we are to ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I say to clients all the time is when they're beating themselves up, would you talk to your daughter like that? Would you say those words to her over this tiny little thing that happened? But for some reason, we decide it's okay to just say the meanest, most horrible things to ourselves sometimes over something that's really not even a big deal.
I want to make sure I touch on too, as part of kind of your journey. You mentioned staying at home. And I had a listener recently ask, she's in corporate, a senior manager, and she's considering staying at home. And she said, I'd love for you to talk on the podcast about that transition, because we talk about careers. So you've done both. And I wonder if we could go back to that point where you decided to stay at home. What were you considering? And then when you decided to leave that and go back to work, your thought process there, because I think that could be helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I decided to stay at home, obviously, I think all of us feel this way when we make that decision. I was in a position where my husband at the time made a lot more money than I did. So it wasn't going to have, like, when you factored in daycare and commutes and all of those expenses, that it wasn't going to have a major impact on our bottom line if I went back to work versus when I stayed. We were both in the early stages of our careers then still, because that's the thing with law school and extra school. You start later in your professional life because you went to school first. So there was a lot of room for growth for both of us. The firm that he was at had greater growing potential. So it was a lot of it, like that was the financial side of it. But personally, emotionally, I grew up with a stay-at-home mom. I was always grateful for that I got to be home in the summer and we didn't have to get shuttled around to daycares and that kind of thing. I just really wanted that experience for my kids of being present with them, being home with them. And I was able to do that.
Was that difficult for you? Because so you haven't gone to law school. And again, this job that society tends to put a lot of value. Was that a difficult transition to decide to stay at home?
Yeah, to a certain extent, I do really feel like I chose it from a personal desire as opposed to feeling like I should, and while it did make financial sense for us in that, like, we could sustain it, I know some women are in a position where it's kind of a break even, right? I could go back to work and pay for all of the things and we wouldn't be worse off, but we wouldn't really be better off. So then what do I want to do and what should I do? And, all of those things. And I didn't really have that drama at the time. I really did feel like that was my strong desire to be home with them. And so that I would figure it out, right? The situation in my first couple of years, I litigated. So I was in court. I was doing that kind of law, which I didn't do after I went back to work. So it was a transition from going from being dressed up and going to court and doing those kind of things to like maternity sweats at home on the couch. It was a mental transition. But for me personally, that transition wasn't super challenging. And I think it just came from my feeling like I had made that choice. My harder transition by far was going back to work after being a stay-at-home mom as opposed to leaving the workforce the first time.
So when you decided to stay at home, you just felt a strong desire to that kind of was stronger than the desire to go back. So if someone's considering staying home, it's like there was this really strong desire, this want to stay home, and you were able to do that.
I think I had a good perspective on reality too, which I think is important if you're making that decision. And depending on your field, it may be different. But for most of us, if we're going to take a year or 5 or more out of the workforce, it's not realistic to assume that you're going to come back in as though you've never left, right? Or even potentially where you were when you left. Again, depending on your field, I can imagine if you're in engineering or technology, that advances so quickly, right? The law doesn't change very fast. So like that piece of it didn't change. But if you're in it, or even marketing, right? If you're in an industry that evolves quickly, I do think you need to take that into realistic account and make that determination into what is the best decision for you personally, career-wise, and for your family. And I think they all get equal playing time, for
Mm.
lack of a better term. I think as women, sometimes we say, well, it's best if, and then we don't consider ourselves in that equation. So whether it's best for our long-term financial success that I keep working, even though I really feel strongly that I want to take time to stay home with my children, or I really want to keep working, but I feel like I should stay home because we can afford it. And I think you take into things all of those pieces into consideration, including the long-term trajectory of what it could mean for your career, and make the best decision for you. And I also, and this is what I work with my clients all the time, whatever you decide is the best decision for you at that time. And no matter what happens in the future, you can never go back and undo it. So why worry about it? That's what you've decided. You always act from that decision going forward.
Well, and then so when you decided to go back, you mentioned that that was a harder transition. What made that more difficult?
Yeah, several things. And I mean, to be full disclosure, I was going through a divorce. So it wasn't like I just decided one day, like, okay, I'm ready to go back to work. There were external forces involved that made it necessary to go back to work. But it was a hard transition for several reasons. One, I had a lot of guilt about leaving my kids and going back to work and what that was going to mean for them. There was just a lot of logistics involved in it, going from, because it was more than switching jobs, right? Because I'd been home for 5 years with my kids. We had also moved to a different state during that 5-year period. So I wasn't even in the state where I'd been before, where I was working. So there were a lot of those kinds of factors to come into play. And then just going back from, and I went back to work in a very traditional working environment. So it was, you were expected to be at your desk. Everybody dresses up every single day. And it was that kind of environment. So that was just a big mental transition from get up and load the kids in the car and go to the gym and do classes at the park district and that kind of thing, and have downtime during nap time, to be back in a corporate role after all of that time. So that was a tougher transition for me. Just, it felt like a bigger change, I guess, with so many different moving pieces. But again, I think I just really felt like the totality of it was what's best. The divorce was what's best. Me having a job was what's best. I was still following my desire, what I wanted to do, and then not going back and second guessing that decision. Like, did I get a job that I probably could have gotten if I'd worked for those 5 years? No, absolutely not. It paid less. All of those things were true, but I didn't regret my 5 years being a stay-at-home mom. I was thankful that I had that time with them and I was able to do that for as long as I did. And then it was time for the next phase, and going back and saying, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that because I could have been in this position instead. I didn't do that because then it felt like, oh, I'm sorry, I spent 5 years being devoted to my kids. I'm not pining on stay-at-home moms versus working moms. I've been and done both, and that's not what I'm saying. But I think regardless of what you do, that's what you did, right? So you've got to accept that. And I think that acceptance of those decisions is a huge piece of it in order to be able to make the most of it and make the right decision. It's just like, yeah, this is what I've decided, so that's how it's going to be. And when I decide something different, I'll do something else.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something. I think Oprah says something like, the stress we feel in life is because we're resisting what's currently happening. And so our stress is coming from trying to resist whatever is going on.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of touching on this acceptance piece of, you've made a decision to move on, or you've had to move on, and accepting that and not living in that past, trying to change it or wish it was different.
I think where I really struggled was leaving my firm to do something brand new, because, and I think that was because why it took me so long to leave. Like, I am not exaggerating when I say I cried every single day. Like, I was so stressed. My adrenaline was up here all the time. And then at night I'd get home, or my husband and I would go out, and I would clutch my wine glass and sob and tell him how miserable I was and how much I hated it. And we worked together. That's how we met. So he had the same, like, we have essentially had the same exact job description. We did the same thing. Both of my husbands have been lawyers. I'm just surrounded by them. But that was a piece of it too, because he wasn't having my same experience with it. Right. And so my misery wasn't resonating with him. And then I was allowing that to invalidate what I was feeling and experiencing.
That's so interesting. That I think that's going to resonate with people. In my own experience, when I didn't love what I did, but I saw other people thriving in it because it was their strengths. It was what they actually it gave them fulfillment. And I
Yeah.
wasn't feeling that. And I was feeling like an imposter, like, what's wrong with me? I think that's going to resonate with people. And it's so interesting because you had it so, I mean, your husband, same position. It must have been so challenging to be in that situation and to feel like, wait, is there something wrong with me? I imagine that would have been my feeling. Must
Yeah.
be something wrong with me. I can't
I,
handle this. I
yeah.
can't do this. I'm not
I,
strong enough.
yeah. I definitely felt that it was so important that he understand how I felt. Like I
Oh,
needed him to
interesting.
feel the same way because I
Mm,
was using that to validate how I felt.
mm,
Another thing that came up a lot during that challenging time period is he would say to me, but you're so good at your job. And I
mm,
was. That's true. But that doesn't mean, I really want to emphasize this, just because you're good at something or you can do something doesn't mean you have to do it.
mm,
And that was something that I really had to work on as well. That just because I was good at it and I had enjoyed it at one point doesn't mean that that's what I had to do forever. I could be good at it and still not want to do it anymore. I could be
mm,
miserable there and he could be happy there. And both
mm,
things can be true.
mm.
And that was not an easy thing for me to come to. But I think that we all do that to a certain extent, like you were talking about with your job, right? Well, if other people like this, why don't I? Like, what you take it on? What's wrong with me? And then I think what I see so much with my clients and with people that I know is that then they don't act because they think something's wrong with me. So I just need to figure out
I need to
that
suck it
piece
up.
of, yeah, yeah, that
I need to.
eventually I'll be better. And then
Mm,
this whole thing will be better because I will figure out what's wrong with me.
mm, That's so powerful. I know I felt that. And it's interesting because the word that comes up for me as you were talking was it's almost like that validation was going to give you permission to make a change. And sometimes
Yeah.
we're looking for permission, like it's okay. When I was thinking about transitioning, I had a conversation with my mother in law, and everyone knew I was unhappy, but I thought I should keep going. I should keep pushing. It felt very hard, very difficult. I had a conversation with her and it was almost like she gave me permission. She said, make a change, do it fast, don't wait. This is your career, this is your rest of your life. But not a lot of us, not everyone has that. Not everyone has that moment. It was
Yeah.
liberating for me.
Yeah, definitely.
How,
That's
how did you create that for yourself?
a lot of hard work, a lot of
Mm,
tears, but that's also why it helps fuel why I do what I do, because I think that is a lot of times what we're looking for is that permission that it's
mm,
like, okay, yeah, you don't have to be
mm,
miserable. You don't have to do something that doesn't bring you joy. You don't have to be part of something that you dread every day. Like you have permission
mm,
to live a life that you don't hate.
mm,
Like, and I think even that, I would say so much bigger. You have permission to live a life that lights you up. You have
mm,
permission to live a life where the bad pieces feel worth it to get to the good pieces because the good
mm,
pieces are so good. But I think as
mm,
women, a lot of us just accept that, okay, well, I hate my job, but oh, well, it's a job, it's a paycheck, right? Or I'm unhappy in my relationship, but well, we're married, or this is what you're supposed to do, or what would happen if we split? I just think it permeates so much of our lives
mm,
that like it's on us to just suck it
mm,
up and
mm,
deal, as opposed to say, okay, this is no longer what I want. What would I like? What
mm,
would be beneficial?
mm,
And going back to what we talked about earlier, like with speaking to your daughters and being kinder to your children, I also like to really stress, because this is something that was helpful for me at every transition. I have two daughters. I am setting an example for them of what it means to be a woman, a professional, a mother, a wife.
mm,
That if I'm modeling a behavior that I wouldn't want for them, how am I teaching them
mm,
not to want it for themselves? Right?
mm,
If they see me crying every night because I hate my job, if they see me dragging myself out of bed in the
mm,
morning because
mm,
I just can't believe I have to do this another day, that's what they internalize as normal for themselves,
mm,
right? And then when it's their life, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, they don't think that they have permission to do something different either. And
mm,
that really drives me. This is not like, I think a lot of us feel like, oh, well, it's just me, I can just suck it up. But when you start thinking about the impact it has on your kids, on generations, on everybody around you, to me, that's very motivating to think it isn't just about me. It isn't just about me being whiny and crying at night, right? It's about what example I'm setting.
Oh, yes. I really felt that too. When I left, I finally decided to leave after I became a mom. So I didn't come back after maternity leave. And that was never my plan. I always planned on going back. Everyone would say, Lupe, you might end up, you love kids, you're going to end up staying home. But actually, I didn't have that desire at first. It was like, at first, I thought, no, I'm coming back. And then when I had my baby girl, I thought, I don't. And at that point, I had a great job, good hours, great team, all the things, but I wasn't fulfilled. And then I thought about my daughter and I thought, oh, is this the example I'm going to give her, that for the next 20 years or whatever amount of time I'm working, that I'm going to a job that doesn't fill me up just because I feel like I should. And becoming a mom, it really made me reflect on that and think, no, that's not the example I want for her. I want her to feel like she can do anything and that she can be successful in whatever lights her up. And so I think that'll resonate with people. Like it really does have an impact. And it may not have an impact right today, but 20 years from now, when they're looking at their career,
Right.
they'll have memories of us
Right.
doing the work that we love. I think that's really important. And I think something that we just think, well, I just have to suck it up for myself and this is what I should be doing. But it does have ripple effect across not just kids, but our siblings, our friends, our family.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And future when I think individually and then collectively, like if our generation of women follows their passions, believes that they don't have to settle, then I think that then has the ripple effect generationally as well, that it's not just in your family line, but collectively we make a difference across the board.
People talk about wealth and passing on wealth and creating a better future for our kids in terms of financial piece. But this piece of setting that example of the work that we do, that is also something we're leaving our kids and leaving those around us that has very lasting impact.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think they're tied together. If you are modeling a behavior that you just have to get by, that something is better than nothing, right, in your job and your life, that also carries over into your ability to make money and to have money and to pass it on, right? Like you don't go after the promotion, the stretch job, the starting your own business. You don't go after those things if you feel like, well, no, what I have isn't that bad, right? Like I can just keep doing it. Then you don't have the ability to stretch both in your example that you're setting or potentially for your generational wealth as well. I think they're very tied together.
You also mentioned earlier the health issues that were coming up for you. You said you were tied to
a cardiac heart monitor. Yeah.
A cardiac heart monitor on your last day. And when I first hired my first coach, I was at a firm and I was really stressed out. I was working really long hours and really didn't enjoy the work and all of that. I had migraines that were horrible. And after I left and went to the next role, it had balance and all those things, the headaches went away. Stress manifests itself in different ways for different people. Someone on the podcast once said, in your head, heart, or gut is usually where the stress. And so it sounds for you it was your heart. For me, it was my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that experience? Because I think there's someone listening right now who is probably experiencing some health issues because of the stress, because of that deep level of unhappiness in the work. How did you recognize it? Did you know that it was happening when it was happening, that it was due to the stress, or what came up for you?
Yeah. So I actually have two stories. One is when I was ending my first marriage. So I was still a stay-at-home mom, and my older daughter was in preschool. And so I was interacting with some moms that I didn't really know that well, but was seeing them pick up and drop off at the preschool, have casual conversations. And so my husband and I split over the summer, and I had been having like gut health problems. Like I'd undergone all these tests, couldn't figure out what was going on. But there's a history of colon cancer in my family, so they were taking it more seriously than I think they would have otherwise, someone my age. But anyway, my husband moved out. I started feeling better, didn't have any of those internal digestive problems that I was having. Then preschool starts again in the fall, and this woman who I had known came up to me and she goes, listen, I don't want to overstep or anything, but she goes, were you having some health problems or something last year? She's like, you just look so different, so vibrant now that she's like, I didn't notice it before, but now seeing you again. And I said, no, but my husband. And I said, I think that's probably what it is. So, I mean, it definitely manifests. And that's kind of a funny example because it's been a very long time, but
It
Definitely
wasn't
with
funny at the time.
it wasn't funny at the time, but I did feel better. I think I was very resistant to the idea that it was stress causing
Mm,
my health problems because I was having it manifest in so many ways. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. I was in the ER with chest pains. Some days it was hard to walk. I mean, I had
mm,
very severe physical ramifications from it. And if you're a woman and you've ever had a non-straightforward illness, you've had a doctor tell you that it's probably stress and it makes you want to throw something. So I was really, really resistant to that idea. But whether it was caused by stress or just exacerbated by stress after leaving, I mean, it's been a process, but over the years, I've progressively gotten so much better. I feel better. Some of it was instant, right? Like the stress went away, but some of it was just my body needed time to
mm,
heal and get better. And because that was years of damage that I did to it too,
mm,
from overworking and the stress and all the travel and just all of the things that I was doing. So I knew my health was deteriorating. I
mm.
knew that. And I knew that my job wasn't helping it, but I think I was very resistant to how much of a mental connection there was because I felt like that for some reason, it goes back to that invalidating. I felt like that invalidated the physical experience that I was having. If we said, well, it's just your job, you're just stressed.
And you were like, my husband's not feeling this.
Right.
So,
Exactly. But definitely my health is dramatically better since I
mm,
left, which isn't to say like everything is wonderful and I don't have stressful days or anything like
right,
that,
right.
but not being constantly under that much stress that was partially from the job itself, but partially from my
Mm,
feelings about it and my
mm,
feelings that I couldn't do anything about it, right? I don't want to be
mm,
here and I have to stay just
mm.
really added to that amount of stress and that internal turmoil, right, that I
Oh,
was
yes.
experiencing.
And I think you just touched on something really important. You said it was a job, but it was your feelings about the job and you're feeling like you weren't able to change that. And that control piece of like, I can't do anything about it. I'm stuck.
Right.
Because the job alone itself is one thing, and your husband was experiencing a different thing with that same role. But it was your feelings and how you're feeling like you couldn't change it. And I think that's how a lot of people feel
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
this feeling of we can't change it. I love how you worded that. That is what's happening for a lot of us. I know when I was having those headaches, I did not think they were stress related.
Mm-hmm.
I had an MRI done, nothing was coming up. I was taking really strong pills. It wasn't helping, but I did not realize they were stress until I left and they went away. And 2 weeks later, they were gone. So for me, it was pretty immediate. I left and they were pretty much gone the 2 weeks after. And now they come back if I'm stressed. And so my husband will say, you have a headache. What are you stressed about?
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to reflect and think. But now it takes a lot to get to that level. The
Right.
person who was on the podcast earlier on how to beat burnout. He was getting his PhD. His wife had an accident. He had an accident. He had a horrible experience and he went to the Mayo Clinic. They asked him about his stress levels and he's like, are you kidding me? This is not stress. And it was part of
Mm-hmm.
part of it. And so I love that you've kind of pointed that out because I think there's someone listening who's experiencing something and dismissing it maybe because we're not feeling that validation of yes, it could be the stress and our
Yeah.
bodies handle it differently.
Right. And I think there's that element of feeling dismissed if we say that it's stress, because it's like
Mm,
you're not being taken seriously. I think sometimes we hear it as it's all in your head, as
mm,
opposed to stress is
mm,
manifesting itself in your body in a way that is
mm,
harmful to you and causing physical effects, right?
mm.
Because in your example with these debilitating migraines, somebody says it's that stress for you, it's easy to internalize, I'm not really having this horrible migraine that I know
Well, I
I'm
think that's a great
experiencing.
point. I think that's a great point. If I'd heard that, I would have thought, nope, I'm strong enough to handle. So you mentioned when we were talking about doing the podcast, the topic of turning setbacks into opportunities. Throughout your journey, and we've talked about your story today, there's been quote setbacks, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what somebody might describe as a setback. What would you want to say about turning those setbacks into those opportunities? Because you've done that throughout your life.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, I think it goes to some of what we've talked about already that once you make a decision that's the decision that you've made. And then you have a choice at that point, right? Like you can say, okay, I'm constantly going to be going back to that decision and wondering if I should have done something differently. Or I can say, that's what I did. This is the experience that I've had. And now it's time to make another decision. And I think opting for the latter really allows you to see what's in front of you, right? Because if you're constantly looking, and I mean, this is cheesy, but it's true. If you're constantly looking at something that you've already done, you're looking at what's behind you, right? So if you are driving and you reach a dead end in a road, you have two choices, right? You can say, okay, I'm going to turn around and go back and make a different choice. Or you can sit there and say, well, I made the wrong turn. This wasn't the right way to go. So now I guess I have to sit here forever, right? This is my home now. And it sounds ridiculous, but we do that, right? We're like, oh, well, this is the way I decided to go. So now that I'm at the end of the road, that's it. There's no other options, right? Instead of, no, my new decision is to turn around and go the other way, right? That's my new decision that I'm making right now. So I think just really having that mindset of what's next, what can I learn from this experience? What do I want to do now? As opposed to what should I have done differently before is really, I think, the number one thing to do in terms of seeing opportunities. And then also the second thing, which we've also touched on here too, is how you talk and think about yourself, right? If you're valuing yourself and your experience, whether it's health problems, whether it's you being dissatisfied in a job, validating your own experience and believing that it's true because you feel it and you experience it allows you to say, okay, I know what I need. I know what I want. I can find what's next, as opposed to something must be wrong with me. Other people don't feel this way, so I'm doing something wrong. I need permission to feel differently. I need to convince somebody else that my way is the right way in order for me to be able to do something different. And I think those two things are very tied together. But I do think it comes down to that, how you're acting in the world once you've made a decision, and then how you are treating yourself as someone who's capable of living a life that you've designed.
And then how would you say to someone who's listening and says, well, how I would like to do that? Amanda's talking about these two concepts. How can someone apply that to their life today? So if they're thinking, I want to take those two concepts that Amanda talked about today and apply them to my life, what can they do? So you as a coach, what would you say to someone as something practical that they can do to kind of apply that in their life?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of if you are, let's just use job transition. We've talked about that a lot today. So if you are wanting to transition, right, you're feeling unhappy in your job, something that you can do is say, okay, what do I love about this job? What are the pieces that make me really happy, that light me up, that I do look forward to? And it maybe happens twice a year, but that's, that's something that I really look forward to. And then what are the pieces that I just really don't like and why? And get really specific, because I think it's very important to make peace with where you're at before you can move on to something else. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners know people like this. You probably know people like this, that they're in one job for 10 or 15 years or whatever, and then they leave and they get a new job, and they're in that job for like 9 months, and then they leave and get a new job, right? And it's because they convinced themselves that the job was the whole problem. It was everything was wrong with that job, and everything was going to be great at the next job. But the reality then hits them that, nope, this is just a job, just like my other job. Some parts are great and some parts are not so great. So I think making peace with it by saying, okay, what do I love? What would I like more of? And then what do I really want to avoid? And then, of course, that middle ground is like, what can I tolerate? Maybe I don't love doing my expenses at the end of the month, but I'm not going to turn down a job because that's part of it. There's all those middle things that's just part of the job. So really coming to terms with that, then that frames your outlook for what you do next. And that helps you see, okay, look, this job here, maybe it's not what I thought I was going to go for, but it has all those pieces of what I love about where I'm at. So, what can I use from where I'm at to get to there and incorporate more of that in my life now?
This can apply to other things. So, for example, if someone is looking for a new relationship and looking for the things that are values to them, important to them, and what didn't work, and what are non-negotiables in their life as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the same thing applies. Make peace Certainly. And like the longer the relationship, obviously, the more there is to this. Make peace with the relationship that you're in as opposed to reacting to it. Very few people are all good or all evil. Like we could probably find examples of both, but generally
Yes.
speaking, all of us as people are a little bit of both, right? So when you're
Yes.
in a relationship with someone, some of the things they do really drive you nuts. And some of the things that they do you love. And then there's the in between, right? That you're just neutral about. Same thing there. What have I loved about this relationship? What do I love about this person? What am I grateful for to have had the experience of being with them versus what are things that I no longer want as part of my life? And then that gives you kind of a even ground to go into looking for the next relationship or starting a new relationship instead of being like, I had the worst husband in the entire world, so whatever happens next is going to be better than that. I mean, it might be, but that's also not setting you up for success in the next relationship either, because you've put the expectation way up here without really evaluating what it is that you want and what you don't want.
And I imagine there's also has to be an element of optimism, or especially I'm thinking about relationships and job too, that it is possible to find a better experience at work, more fulfilling, a partner who is a better fit for
Yeah.
us. There has to be an element of optimism.
Yeah, I think so too, both for so that you're even looking, right? Like you have to have that certain amount of possibility and hope so that you're even looking. And I've heard it described different ways, but the way I heard it described that I really like the best is I heard Joel Osteen, who it's worth watching on YouTube. You don't have to be religious to get something out of it. Yes, he's a minister, but it's just, he talks about what invitations are you sending? And I mean, he's talking about God, the universe, whatever you want to apply it for. My coach actually shared this with me and it's really impactful. But what are you inviting? So if you're inviting new possibilities, I wonder what my next job is going to be. I wonder how amazing my next relationship is going to be. I feel so excited for these new opportunities. That's what you're inviting. If you're like, I'm stuck here, I can't do anything else, this is all I know how to do, I'll never find another job, that's what you're inviting. So, and it really is, I mean, we can think about it a million different ways. I usually teach it is, what you pay attention to is what you'll notice, right? And there's a whole scientific phenomenon that the more you pay attention to something, the more you're going to notice it. So if you are only noticing people that are miserable at work, right, then you think everybody is miserable at work, right? So
Yes.
that's what your reality becomes because that's what you're paying attention to. Our brain has 16,000 thoughts a day. So it has to filter out the stuff that isn't important for us to notice. So the more you tell it to pay attention to something, the more it thinks, oh, this is what I should be calling in and not filtering out, right?
Oh, I love that so much. And I really believe that. So, and that's part of wanting to start the podcast too, is having listeners listen to people who love their work so that there's examples of someone, even if they don't know them directly. Amanda's out there doing work she loves.
Yeah.
And she made a change. She invited possibility into her life. I love how you worded that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to be really helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome. I love that. Like I said, it's worth watching on YouTube. It's like 20 minutes. Definitely worth the watch, regardless of your beliefs.
So if someone wants to learn more about you, Amanda, or wants to work with you, how can they find you? How can they follow along?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Amanda Stark. My company is Glitter and Gravitas, and I am on Instagram at Glitter and Gravitas. And Gravitas is Gravitas. My mom always tells me it's too hard of a word, and I should fix it. But Glitter and Gravitas, that's also my website, glitterandgravitas.com. You can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, on my website. I do have coaching spots open. I work with women one-on-one. So if you're interested in that, we can talk more about that. But I would just love to connect and have anybody who's interested follow me or give me a hello, drop a line, say that they listened and got something out of it. I would love that.
And I'll be sure to link those links on the show notes. Thank you so much for being here today.